We're looking at the lymphatic model. The lymphatic system functions to collect excess fluid from the interstitial space after capillary filtration and reabsorption. It also transports dietary lipids and gets them into circulation. And it also carries out immune responses because the lymphatic tissues initiate highly specific responses that are directed against particular microorganisms or abnormal cells. And so some of those tissues are the host for many of your lymphocytes. The smallest of the lymphatic vessels begins with the lymphatic capillaries that are closely associated with the capillaries of the circulatory system. But on this model, you won't see those. Instead, you will see a bunch of white lines which represent the other lymphatic vessels, starting with the collecting vessels. Collecting vessels gather lymph from the lymphatic capillaries, and that fluid moves then to the lymph nodes in the various regions of the body. From the collecting vessels, fluid will move into lymphatic trunks, and then it will move into lymphatic ducts before being dumped into the subclavian veins of the circulatory system. We can look at and point out several areas of lymph nodes on this particular model. So I want to go through the ones that are on your lab guide. At the back of the head, we have the occipital lymph nodes. Alongside the neck, which is the cervical region, we have superficial lymph nodes. And then under the sternocleidomastoid muscle, we would have the deep cervical lymph nodes. On the side of the face, we have a gland. It's a salivary gland. And associated with this are lymph nodes as well. We see only one on this particular model. This is the parotid lymph node. At the mandible, there are also lymph nodes. So up underneath the mandible are the submandibular lymph nodes. At the location of the chin, there are several lymph nodes here that are called the submental lymph nodes. As we move down, we can see that there's a bunch of lymph nodes in the axillary region. There are also lymph nodes in the brachial region, and at the elbow, the cubital region. As we continue down into the thoracic cavity, we have lymph nodes associated with the trachea and the bronchi. Further down, there are lymph nodes that are associated with the stomach, the gastric lymph nodes. And celiac lymph nodes are associated with the celiac trunk, a large artery that comes off of the aorta. There are hepatic lymph nodes, and there are mesenteric lymph nodes. We also have iliac lymph nodes, inguinal, and femoral. Let's talk about the vessels. At the top, near the jugular vein, we have a jugular trunk. This drains into the right lymphatic duct, which drains into the subclavian vein. There is also a subclavian duct, which also drains into the right lymphatic trunk. The same thing is true on the left side, but the jugular trunk drains into the thoracic duct, and the thoracic duct drains into the left subclavian vein. The thoracic duct spans the entire thoracic cavity before coming up to the top where the subclavian vein is located. And down at the bottom of the thoracic trunk is a bulging structure called the cisterna chyli. This collects lipids. It's a bulging structure. It acts as a reservoir. So as you breathe in and out, the changes in the pressure within the thoracic cavity help to move lymph up into the subclavian vein. Now we're looking at the sagittal head model, and I want to point out some lymphatic tissue called the tonsils. These are strategically positioned in the body in order to help defend the body against pathogens that might be inhaled or ingested. So the first type is located in the nasopharynx. This is the pharyngeal, also called the adenoid tonsil. This is the soft palate, and below that and behind the oral cavity in the oropharynx, we have the palatine tonsils. Behind the tongue, we have the lingual tonsils. This is a representative model of the small intestines. So let me just walk you through the basic structure of the small intestines. These finger-like projections are called the villi. And so these contain cells that would help to absorb the nutrients that pass through the lumen of the small intestines. Some of those nutrients are going to be in the form of lipids. Those can also be absorbed, but they travel in the lymphatic vessels called lacteals. Lacteals then enter into other lymphatic capillaries before entering into the collecting vessels. Within the small intestines, there's areas of lymphatic tissue called lymphatic nodules or follicles. And in many places of the body, these come and go as pathogens invade the tissues and the immune system answers a challenge. However, there are other areas of the body in which the lymphatic nodules are relatively consistent, and the small intestines is one of those locations. So in the ileum, which is the distal portion of the small intestines, so that's the very last part of the small intestines, they form clusters called Peyer patches. And on this model, that is what you are seeing here. These would be the capillaries and then the collecting vessels.